So this morning, I just want to share three themes with you. The first one is laughing at death. The second one is dragging ourselves to Galilee. And the last one is a meeting with a person. So first, laughing at death. There was a guy, and on Easter Sunday, he went to the 7:30 Mass with his family, and afterwards they had planned to have other family and friends come over at about 4 in the afternoon, and they were going to have this great Easter celebration. And after Mass, the man looked at his wife and he said, "Hey, Fred's invited me to go play golf with him. Would that be okay?" And his wife, of course, looked at him like, "Are you crazy?" He's like, "No, I promise. I'll be home 1:30, 2 o'clock at the latest. I'll be home and I'll help you with dinner and it'll be fine." She's like, "I really don't like this idea." And he's like, "It's gonna be fine." And so she finally agrees and he goes, and 2 o'clock comes and goes and he's not home. 4 o'clock comes, all the family and guests come over, he's not home. 8 o'clock at night, he finally shows up after everybody's already left. She looks at him and she is furious. She says, "What happened? You promised you'd be home at 2 o'clock. You didn't even make it by 8 o'clock. What happened?" He said, "Honey, I am so sorry. It was awful. On the 11th hole, Fred collapsed and died." And his wife was just shocked. And she said, "Oh my goodness, I am so sorry." And he said, "I know, it was terrible. After the 11th hole, it was hit the ball, drag Fred, hit the ball, drag Fred. It took forever." You have to laugh at death. The reason why you have to laugh at death is because you're a Christian, and death has no power over you. And on Easter Sunday, we most especially have to laugh at death because we see in the resurrection Christ's power over sin and death, that there really is nothing scary. The only thing scary is sin in our own lives, and that's the enemy. That's the one thing we have to resist. Death is a given. All of us are going to die, but it is not permanent. It does not hold power over us. And so on Easter Sunday, we especially want to laugh at death because it is not as scary as the rest of the world would like us to believe. And that's why in the gospel today, we start out with a tomb, because that's where most of us begin. And oftentimes, we have those dead places in our lives. Mary Magdalene goes to a tomb and she encounters something entirely different. She encounters an empty tomb and an angel telling her the Lord has risen from the dead. And she even meets the Lord on her way to tell his friends that they should go to Galilee and meet him. Now, we have 40 days of Lent to prepare us for Easter Sunday, right? And as we prepare for Easter Sunday, we hope to arrive on Easter Sunday with Easter faith and Easter joy, but it doesn't always happen that way. And the church understands that's why we have 50 days of Easter to try and understand how this message of resurrection speaks to our lives. Today, some of you may have arrived here at Mass thinking that you were coming to a tomb, to some dead religion that really we just kind of go through the motions and we just celebrate on Easter Sunday and then we go back to our lives as if nothing really happened. That's what we talk about in dragging ourselves to Galilee, because Jesus says very clearly for the disciples to go back to Galilee, to that place where they first met the Lord, to that place where they first knew that Jesus was the Messiah, that he really was Lord of heaven and earth, and that he cared about them individually. And so sometimes we have to drag ourselves back to Galilee, to that place of first encounter. And I want you to think for a minute about when you first met the Lord, when you first started to become a believer in Jesus Christ. And for some of you, it may not be yet. But for any of you who were baptized, that was your first encounter. When you, probably for many of you as a little child, were baptized into the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, that was your moment of first encounter. Now, show of hands, how many of you know the date of your actual baptism? Anybody? All right, not too many. I want to encourage you, go back, dig into your baptism certificate, call the church where you were baptized if you can, Find out the date of your baptism. That is an important date. It's an anniversary every year. In fact, I give you permission to have a second birthday party every year because that's your birthday into eternal life. That's the most important day. It's actually more important than the day of your birth because it's the day of your birth into eternity. Now, I'm very lucky. My birthday of baptism happens to be May 5th. So the whole country celebrates my day of baptism. It's awesome. I have a margarita every year for my baptism anniversary. But you know, whatever the date is, try to celebrate it. Recognize that that was the first time you were introduced to the person of Jesus Christ. Now granted, most of us were probably way too small to understand what was taking place. And that's why celebrating the anniversary is so important, because we go back to Galilee. We go back to the place of first encounter. And in doing so, we start to recognize that we're not just celebrating history. We're not just celebrating something that took place in the past. We're actually celebrating a living relationship. Jesus was a real person who walked on the earth. He had friends. He had a mother and a stepfather. He experienced joy and pain and sadness. He experienced everything we experience. He even experienced moments where he questioned whether or not he understood God's will. We can identify with that person. We can recognize in that person an advocate for us, someone who cares about us personally, deeply, and with love we can only begin to fathom. And so I invite you during this Easter season, these 50 days of Easter, to pick one of the Gospels, anyone, Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. Pick one of the Gospels and just start reading it. Just start seeing who this person is for you, who this Jesus is that desires to not only be a part of your past, but your present and your future. And to recognize that what we celebrate today is a victory over life and death. And that's why I want you to look to the back of the church now. There's 4 circles on the back wall of the church. And if you see those 4 circles, they have letters in them. Those letters are IC, XC, NIKA. So those are the first and last letters of Greek words. So the first one, IC, is the first and last letter of the Greek word for Jesus. The second one, XC, are the first and last letters of the Greek word for Christ. And then NIKA is Nika. That's why people who want to be fast, people who want to win, wear Nike shoes. Because Nika means victor. And so when you put that whole thing together, it's a Christogram. It says, Jesus Christ Victor. That's what we celebrate here. We gather together in this space so that when we go out, our lives proclaim that Jesus is victor. Not just today, but every day. The victor over sin, the victor over death, the victor who gives us hope.